everyone, welcome to another Microsoft Reactor live stream. My name is Nadia and I will be your host for today's session. Before we dive into the main event, I'd just like to remind everyone about our Reactor Code of Conduct. Our aim is to cultivate a positive and inclusive environment for all our participants, so please let's keep our interactions respectful and supportive. This evening, we are joined by Deep, who is a cloud solution architect here at Microsoft, and Deep will be taking you through how to create a production-ready Copilot. Throughout this session, feel free to drop your questions into the chat, and we'll do our best to address as many as possible, and we'll also share any additional resources in the chat for you as well. For those who want to revisit today's session, you can do that on our Reactor YouTube channel. I will also post the recording link in the meetup page. So without further ado, I'd love to give a warm virtual round of applause to our wonderful speaker, Deep. Hi, Deep. Over to you.
Hello, thank you, Nadia, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Today we'll be talking about creating a production-ready Copilot. This talk is actually part of a 3-part series, and it's the final part. So if you haven't watched any of the other parts, don't leave now, but Nadia will post a link to the channel, the YouTube channel, where you can go and you can watch the other parts as well. This is the last part of the 3-part series. I will cover some of the stuff that's already been covered in the other 2 parts, but we will focus primarily here on how to productionize a Copilot that you've already built using Azure AI Studio, which is what we did last time. In terms of the agenda, we'll split this talk into 2 separate parts. First part will be almost entirely a demo. So we'll go through a demo of how you architect, how you evaluate, and how you deploy a model. And then we'll go through a little bit about Azure AI Studio and how that really helps you to do that. This is the demo here. The second part of the conversation will be about how do you productionize and scale it. So we'll take a look at some patterns. It won't be all 45 patterns because we only do have an hour, but it will be maybe 10, 20 patterns that you can use when you're looking to productionize your own Copilot. And this is around how do you monitor, test, make sure that the Copilot is safe and ready to hit production. So now before we do that, let's go through the demo. Let's do a full run through of prompt flow. Let's do a full run through of how you trace errors and debug things in prompt flow. And then how do you evaluate the answers you've received? How do you deploy that prompt flow into an endpoint so you can send REST API calls to get answers from your prompt flow endpoint? And then how do you deploy that into a web application? So that's a whole full-scale web application. Okay, so let me just share my other screen over here and we'll go directly into this demo. I think I myself have been on quite a bit of a journey. When I started, I didn't do many of these demos. I did just show videos, but as time has gone on, I feel like the demos are really engaging, and it's a way to help people actually look at what it takes to deploy something rather than a video which only gives you the highlights of how it works. So in this one, we're going to be doing it directly on the Azure portal, and we're going to be picking up right where we left off last time, which is we went through AI Studio, we deployed a prompt flow model, but it was quite rudimentary. There wasn't much in there. We just got up to a demo. In this one, though, I've actually built out a query, which we'll take a look at in a second, because it does take a while to build out these flows. But before we go on to that, I want to show you how easy it is to create your own flow. So you press create, and you can see here you've got a bunch of different flows options that you can choose from. Chat flow would probably be my favorite. So you'd just go into the chat flow, you'd get a chat-like interface, and it would be ready to essentially answer questions about a data set that you're going to put in, following the standard RAG model. So that's how you create a new flow. Let's go into the flow that I've created already. This is what I didn't have last time around. And you'll see once it loads that this flow follows a very specific set of instructions. I guess before we go over this flow, it might be worth showing you some of the documents that are there as part of this data set. So hold on, let me load up one of the documents here. But while I'm loading that up, let's just go through this flow here. So the flow involves a few different steps. The first step is, and you can see it's labeled here, which role is this query about? So as you might guess, the query that we're putting in talks about some sort of a job role. And what we're trying to do with this query is understand which roles that query is talking about. I think this will make a little bit more sense when I show you the data set. So let me just open this up here. This is the data set that I want. I believe that's loaded up. There you go. I don't want to pick up where I left off. So this is the role descriptions data set that we've put in along with some other files last time. So the role descriptions data set essentially gives us a bunch of different roles at Contoso and the job description of that role, some objectives, responsibilities, and qualifications. This is the data set that we've given to the model, right? So all of these roles and the different qualification criteria as well. Now, let's go back into the flow. So what this flow does is it takes that data set and it takes the question that the user has put in. Here, I'm not sure if you can see, it's a bit grayed out, but here it says an example, and the last one that I ran was, what is a sales representative? A sales representative is one of the roles inside this document. So let's go through this step by step. What this will do, which role is this query about, which matches, you can see that matches that. So this step here takes that prompt in and outputs the role. So for example, for that prompt, I've run this before, the role, the output that it generates is actually a JSON with the roles in there. So now the awesome thing is you can actually choose to output specifically in JSON. So what I've done is I've put the response format as type JSON. And when you do that, you also need to put the word JSON inside the query there, which I've done. So that's number one. Step number two is then to add that into the prompt. So we go, we add that into the prompt there, and the outputs of that should be just roles, sales representative. So we're trying to create a search query essentially that we can use in our index lookup. The index lookup is the next step here. So all this does is it concatenates all the roles that are mentioned with an or in the middle. And you can imagine this is how you would search Google for something, for example, is that you would concatenate all the different search queries with an or. And so this is very similar to that, but you're searching your own internal documents rather than a public search engine. So I did that here, that outputted this, and then that gets passed into the index lookup. The index lookup, as I mentioned last time, uses Azure AI Search, which is a service that we have to index any set of documents that you have. So you can put in your own knowledge base and index that. By the way, if there are any questions, more than happy to answer them during this presentation as well. So that's what this search query does. Honestly, this is fairly easy to set up because it fills in a lot of the information by itself, AI Studio. So you'll see here, this is all of my configuration, and most of this is just drop down. So you just select, and then yeah, you can change it. It's just giving me an error because I haven't started my compute session up here. A compute session is kind of like when you use a code sandbox or or GitHub code spaces. You need a compute layer behind what you're doing, and that's just a VM, an ephemeral VM running in the background to support whatever needs to be done here. So all your computation for the AI logic is run on that compute session. So now that the compute session is running, that actually ran really fast. Now that the compute session is running, you'll see that a lot of these drop downs should work. So if I just click there you go. So now it's loading. And honestly, this was really easy to set up. There's only a few options in those drop downs, and then you'll have this set up in no time. Awesome. So once you got your search query, so this output of this is a bunch of documents. Let's go through them. So you can see here, output, this is the document here, role library.pdf, of course. And then you can see an extract from that document here. There's more. So this is another one, role library.pdf, another part of that document. And then more from that same document, actually, role library.pdf, which is awesome, which means that it understood the task. It understood that it needed to get the details about a sales representative, and then it outputs it here. So that's the search query. Once that happens, I've actually done something a little bit weird in here. This is definitely not going to result in the best answer. But the reason why I've done this is just so that we can have a test data set, and I'll get to that in a second. So we can evaluate how good this chatbot is, right? We want to know when it passes and when it fails. So this will allow us to do that. What this does is it actually filters the results, these search results, for the role. So it goes through each result one by one. It looks at the text field of each result, and it tries to figure out if any of the roles that are mentioned up here, here in this array, any of them, if they are exactly match any part of this text. So you can see here, it's getting the roles from the role list. It's loading that in. And then this one, it's a bit convoluted, but all it's doing is it's searching these search results for that specific role or list of roles. So if any of those roles match any of the search results, it'll keep that search result, basically. So the output of this should be a subset of the search results that were received. Right, so this one, I'm not sure how many were received, but it seems like quite a few were received. 3, 4, 5, 6. Wow, there's so many. There you go. 9 were received. And in here, there's only 3 results. And Nadia's gracefully just put the YouTube links to the past few sessions. So after this, feel free to go over and watch those as well. So yeah, it basically has filtered. It's a Python script that has filtered our search results for us. You can understand the power of this now. You can understand that you can combine these different blocks to essentially give you a really powerful way to build out your own chatbot, build out your own Copilot. After it's done that, it then takes the filtered data set and responds to the user. So essentially, the inputs here are the outputs of the last one, and the question that the user put in, and the chat history, and the roles as well. And then the outputs of this is just whatever's returned to the user, which is just, there you go. Sales representative is a professional responsible for driving sales of products and services. So that's what you would expect from this flow if it results correctly. Now let's have a think about what happens, or why would the result be incorrect? Well, let's say that instead of putting sales representative up here, we put in representative of sales. What is a representative of sales? Technically, we know that we're talking about the same role, but it's probably not going to be able to find that, because it's going to take, instead of taking sales representative here as the role, OpenAI or the GPT-4 model is going to take representative of sales, and then it's going to filter out all the results. And there's a specific reason why in here it's going to filter out all the results, because that exact string doesn't exist within this document here. So there's sales representative. Oops. Sale. Okay, there's a few sales representatives mentioned here. There you go. That's the sales representative job description, but there's no representative of sales. Even though the index search would output that as a search result, it would get filtered out by this Python function. So that's what I want to show you and how that works. So let's actually test it out. Cool, this is the last entry that I did, but let's create a new chat. So in order to do that, you press that button down there, which starts a new chat session. And let's ask it the same question again, just to verify that it works. You will notice that it does take a while sometimes. It is faster, definitely in production, but in this dev environment, it can be a little bit laggy. It actually shows you that it's running, and it shows you what it's run and what it's yet to run. So there you go, it says it's completed. And like this, it's just going to run everything. And then once it's completed, you can see, there you go. There's your answer. Sales representative is responsible for driving sales, etc., etc. The awesome thing now is that just like software development, you have it's still in beta, it's still in preview, but you have some sort of a debugger that you can use if things don't go to plan. It did take me a lot of fiddling around to make sure that this flow worked. And this debugger was crucial to helping me in that endeavor. So let's go into there. So in order to get to the debugger, by the way, I just pressed this button, the view trace button. And then you can see a step-by-step recount of what happened. So it invoked this function. You can see the inputs and the outputs and any exceptions that were raised. And then you can see that it did a call to OpenAI chat. And then the answer was sales representative. The thing that probably we need to focus on is this filter results for a role. So the role that was inputted was this, the results that were inputted was this, and the output is a subset of that. So 1, 2, 3, yeah. It's the exact same result as we had before, where we had 3 outputs. So there you go. That's how you do a trace of what's happening. And this is so much easier to use than what we were using before, which was these outputs. Cool. Now let's run that scenario again that I mentioned before, where we wanted to test out what happens if we do representative of sales. So we can do something like that. And let's see what happens. Now, one of the things that I've written in here that's probably worth mentioning is that I've told OpenAI that if the documents don't answer the question or it's empty, say that you don't know the answer from the document. Now, funnily enough, and this is where the AI never gives the same answer all the time. There's always variation. And sometimes we need to tweak the meta prompt in order to make sure that the answer that we're getting is correct. I will show you a better way to run these tests in a second. But in this case, the output has been based on the provided documents. The sales representative is blah, blah, blah. Now let's see why that happened. I'm actually curious to see, what it did. So when I say what query is this, look at that. It's actually changed. It's changed representative of sales to sales representative. GPT-4 has had the insight to say that, hey, representative of sales is probably not the most commonly used name for that role. So it's actually changed it to sales representative, which is why we got an answer. Great. Well, that didn't work exactly how I wanted it to, but it does, do what it needs to do. I'm trying to think of a different one. Maybe we try, what is a, sorry. I did try a few others in the evaluation stage. Maybe we try something that's not here at all. Maybe we try like lecturer or something. Yeah, so there's no lecturer in here. Let's try that. And the answer that we're looking for is this is not able to be found from the documents mentioned. So far, you know how to test this one by one. But when you're doing this at scale, it becomes really cumbersome to test these prompts one by one. So we will next go on to the evaluation stage and show you how to evaluate the performance of your flow. But let's just wait for this to quickly come back. It's completed. Okay, well, it didn't exactly follow what I said, but that's okay. It should have output, I can't find that role. The documents were empty, and it decided to do this anyway. So it is the case that AI can be a little bit unpredictable. And that's the fun of these demos, to show you that AI is the way that it is, and that you might need to tweak these meta prompts here in order to make it more personable, I guess, or make it more relevant to the answers that you're getting. Okay, let's now go through the evaluation step, which is how you run these tests at scale. So when running an evaluation, you click on this little evaluate and then go into custom evaluation. What an evaluation does is it lets you run a bunch of different questions, and it also lets you give a ground truth, which is what the answer should be for that question. And then it compares the answer that's been generated with the answer that should be the answer for that question. So let's try to create one. So we can click next. We've given it a name. It asks me for chat history and the question. Chat history, I'll just leave as an empty array because it's not relevant for this particular evaluation. But with the question, you actually need to give in a data set. So if I go add new data, you can add in a CSV file or a JSON-L file as well. And it will get the results from that. So here, for example, you've got a preview of the top 5 rows of the file that I've entered. You can also get a sample file as well. So you can structure your answer based on that. So preview of the top 5 rows. This is the question. This is the ground truth that I have given. That's what the answer should be. And then if I click on next, you can see these are the built-in evaluations. So you can do, for example, a F1 score evaluation, which tells you how close is the answer that GPT-4 gave based on this flow to the answer, the ground truth that you have put in. There's also other ones like the GPT similarity evaluation, coherence, fluency, relevance, groundedness. There's a bunch of different evaluations here which you can try, and I'll show you the final results of this in a second. And then there's configuration, and there's finally review. I've run this before, so let's go and have a look at the evaluation that I've already run before. Before we do that, actually, one thing I wanted to show you quickly is how the run works. So you can see up here, it says view batch runs. If I click on that one, view batch runs, that actually shows me the runs that have happened so far. You can go into evaluations down here as well. This is the actual running of that evaluation. Okay, let's have a look at what the outputs were. There you go. So there were 6 different questions that were asked of the chatbot. This is the answer that the chatbot provided. And yeah, that's all that's in this screen here. And you can also see the trace for each of those runs. So you can see how powerful this is now. You have created your own custom flow. You're then able to test at scale that custom flow based on questions that you need answered in your organization. Right? So these are the answers that the chatbot got. Now, what you probably want to do is compare this to the ground truth. And we have evaluations for that. So if you go into the evaluation section on the left, and I click on one of the completed ones, and you have a look at, we'll come back to the graphs, but you have a look at the output. It gives me, this is the question that was asked of your flow. This is the answer that that flow outputted. And this is the truth, the ground truth. What I have said should be the right answer. At the end here, you also get these scores. So you get a similarity score between these two. You get a coherence score of the answer and a fluency score of the answer. And you also get an F1 score. The awesome thing then is you can filter where, say, a score is below a certain amount. The F1 score is similarity as well between these two. So you get a few different metrics that you can play around with. What you can see here, though, is that it's pretty much answered everything correctly for this run, at least. So, for example, where there was no role in the data set provided, it said that there is no such role, which is not what happened just before, but that's okay. Jimmy asked a question in the chat, so I'll just answer it now. The pricing for AI Studio actually is not, it's not based on your usage of AI Studio, it's based on the usage of the underlying services. So if you're using OpenAI to resolve your AI queries, that's charged. If you're using virtual machines to host your service or host your models, that's charged. But the usage of AI Studio itself is free at the moment. So you just need to pay for the underlying compute that you're using for your deployments, for your runtimes, and for any OpenAI spending that you have, and also your search as well, so indexes and those things. Yeah, so it's pay as you go, and this one, for example, it's not consuming more than $5-10 a day in total for me to run all of these services. So it shouldn't be too expensive for demo purposes. And obviously, as you scale out and you get more and more customers of this, you will need to scale these virtual machines out a little bit more, which will cost you a little bit more as well. Okay, so that's your evaluation completed. And these dashboards, they just give you a visual representation of that evaluation. Okay, that's that. Let me just see what else I have. So for full run through of prompt flow and tracing, we did that. Evaluating the answers received, we've done that. The next one is around deploying prompt flow into an endpoint. So let's say you've got your flow now. I've gone through the flow with everyone. And you want to deploy this into production. How do you do it? Well, there is a button here which lets you deploy it to an endpoint. So you can click on this button, and that will help you to create load balanced compute resources in order to deploy that endpoint. So you give your endpoint a name, and I would recommend using Entra-based authentication instead of key-based authentication. That's just more secure. So you don't have to, you're not using key-based authentication, so you don't have to recycle your keys and things like that. Azure Search is not pay-as-you-go with my account. Azure AI Search should be pay-as-you-go. I can show you this actually. So, well, it's part of Azure AI Services now. AI Search over here. I have had this running for a while. Maybe I need to go into cost management actually. This one's part of the basic tier. Let me see. Scale, that's probably the one. Yeah. It should be pay as you go as far as I know. So the cost of this one is about $100 a month for a basic tier. There is also a free tier, I believe, which you can use for even lower cost. But it just depends how much data you want to index. If you're just playing around with it, I would say go for the basic tier. If you're only leaving it around for a couple of days, it won't cost you that much. And then, okay, so I've shown you that now. I will give you more information on pricing if you do need it. But I would say have a look at the Azure pricing page for AI Search, which will give you more information for that. Deployment, outputs and connections. So this is all good. And then, yeah, you can review and deploy that. So once you've deployed it, it goes into your deployments down here. And that endpoint is ready for you to test. After this, what I would recommend is putting this endpoint behind an API management instance, which would help you to rate limit the endpoint and make sure that it's all secure against DDoS attacks and against other attacks. Thanks, Nadia. Awesome. Let's go into here just so we can do a bit of a test. So I've deployed it. This is what it looks like. It actually lets me do a test here. So I've put the same query that I had before. What is a sales representative? And that should give me the answer. You will see that this is a little bit faster than there you go. You'll see that it's a little bit faster than using the developer environment, of course, because this is, it's running in production. You can't change anything in this environment, but at least it is faster. So in order to do this, you've got your URL here. There's also a Swagger URI, so you can look at the Swagger definition as well. Never mind, you'll have to use the key to access it. But you will be able to access the Swagger definition, the URL. You can also toggle on and off public network access. So if you want to use private networking, you can do that as well. And then one of the best features that's here is actually quality monitoring. So you can monitor the outputs that this endpoint is generating based on fluency, coherence, groundedness, and relevance. So I'm not sure how it would do groundedness though, because you'd need to put in the ground truth. But definitely with coherence, fluency, it's good to have that monitoring enabled for all of your endpoints. So you get feedback on how well, you get AI generated feedback on how well your endpoints are doing. That is that. You do get some basic monitoring here in terms of requests per minute and latency and error rate. So that's how you deploy an endpoint. On top of this, I would recommend using API management so you can rate limit this endpoint. But that's how you deploy an endpoint here. The other thing that AI Studio allows you to do, and this is what you might be wondering, is, well, how do I deploy an actual application that someone can use, not necessarily just a API endpoint that you need to use JSON to use. In order to do that, what you do is go into this chat option in the playground. Now, you can't deploy prompt flows here yet. So you'll have to use this playground, the chat playground, to deploy that. So what I've done here is I've added some data. I did it before, but you can add your data source in here. You select the index, and that adds your data source. And then you can go ahead and use this button up top called Deploy Web App to deploy it to Azure App Service, which is what I've done. These deployment models, these are just OpenAI GPT models, but you can use any models. There's a bunch of different models here for you to choose from. And they're not just OpenAI models. You can choose from Meta's models. You can choose from other Mistral models and other awesome. So I've done that, how that works. So then we go into deployments down here. We go into app deployments, and you can see the deployment running down here. And that takes you to a web app. So all of a sudden, we've gone from the development environment where we are, where we're just developing the AI and we're making sure that we know what flow the AI is going to follow. And we've gone into the production environment where we've deployed the AI and it's ready to take on user questions. And we've also deployed it in a way that's scalable as well, where it's load balanced and you can monitor everything to make sure that it's running properly. We've also covered evaluations as well. So how can you make sure that the answers that the AI gives for common questions are correct? Now, this one, of course, it doesn't use the flow, like I mentioned. I believe that's coming in a future release of AI Studio, but don't hold me to that. But this one here, all it does is it uses one of the GPT-4 models, and it technically should have that index, but I have tried a few questions and it hasn't worked before. So let me try this again. So what is a sales representative? Let's see what happens. It doesn't seem like it's using the data set that we gave. Oh, it has one reference. Let me have a look. Oh, no, there you go. It did use the data set that we gave. And it outputs it right there. So, yeah, it wasn't working before. I'm not sure why, but now it's perfectly fine. So, yeah, that is how you deploy an application end-to-end using this, using Azure AI Studio. Now, there's a lot of other things to consider as well when you're looking at productionizing your own AI instance, when you're looking at productionizing your own Copilot. So I think what I'll do is I'll switch back to the slides now and show you some of the other considerations that you might have. So let me change to these slides. Awesome. So we've covered all of those four. We've covered prompt flow and tracing. We've covered evaluating answers received. We've covered how do you deploy it to an endpoint. We've also covered how to deploy to a web app. Okay, let's cover a few architectural principles when you're going for production scale. What you'll find quickly is that you'll need to build a pipeline. And within this pipeline, you'll need to create your, and this is not just about DevOps and DevSecOps. It's also regarding how do you manage sessions within the tool set as well. So we need to create a pipeline so we can understand, okay, we can keep a history of what each user is sending. We can record their history and help them retrieve their history once they're done. To do that, we need to use session IDs. So each message gets a message ID and each session gets a session ID. And that way we can keep track of all the different history and how to, and over time, we can help resurface that for the user. Learn prompt engineering. Prompt engineering is really important because the better your meta prompt, the better your answers will be. We saw there a clear example where it was fine for a lot of the test cases, the 5 test cases that I had put in, but when I asked a different question about a lecturer, it didn't work exactly as we thought it would. So starting with clear instructions is really important. We need to be repeating key instructions at the end. This is something that I didn't do, but that's something that you can definitely use in order to reinforce instructions. Of course, act as if you're instructing someone with zero knowledge or context. You need to be very descriptive. And I'm sure in our usage of ChatGPT as an example AI application over time, we've noticed that we need to be very descriptive. We need to specify a lot of detail. Order matters. So if you are specifying the most critical instruction at the very end, it's more likely to get picked up. Add clear syntax and just instruct in an unambiguous manner. So prompt engineering is very important. There's other courses as well. I'm sure there's Microsoft documentation on it as well. So it's very important to learn about the meta prompt and how to best and create some different meta prompts to test out. And it's very easy to test as well now with the evaluation toolkit that we have that I showed you today. Learn prompt injection as well. Now, this is a bit of a security exercise, but if your user can modify the system prompt, then it becomes very difficult to police their interactions. So what I would say is do two things. Number one is obviously include in your meta prompt ways to stop that from happening. And number two, use our safety toolkits and make sure that you are, our content filters is what we call them, and make sure that you are stopping those prompts before they even hit before the user even gets an answer to their question. I will show you the content filters in a second, by the way. I did miss that in the initial demo. And then there's one more thing that you can do is, yes, the evaluations. So make sure that when you're doing your evaluation, you put in prompt which could throw off the meta prompt, and make sure that make sure that we're able to recognize that and answer a little bit. There we are. And then finally, any user content can be used for injection. So if you have RAG being done from user content, that can also be used as injection. So be very careful about where you're getting your documents from, and make sure that if that's user-generated content, then that's passed through your content filters as well. Number 4, messaging types. So there are 4 different message types that are included within each Azure OpenAI prompt that you can send. One is the system message type, which is your meta prompt, essentially. So that's your default behavior of your assistant. That's what that defines. The user, which is any inputs that the user has given us. And this also includes any past chat history as well, which is actually another variable that you can use in AI Studio, but it's very specific to that. So user plus chat history. The third one is the assistant, which is the responses that the system has generated after the user has prompted something. And then lastly, something that we're probably recently introduced is a function or a tool, which, for example, you can use the weather API to get the latest weather information. These are fun. However, again, user-generated content. So we need to be very careful in parsing all these to make sure that that we're getting the outputs that we want. Okay, next one. Remove state. So whenever you send a request, the history, all the history needs to be sent with that request as well. But what you'll find is that as you are expanding on a chat conversation, if you send all the history of the chat conversation, over time, that will become too much. So it'll exceed the token limit of that conversation. What you'll need to do is you'll need to strategically start removing messages from the history in order to make it fit within that token limit. What the slide also calls out is what happens when the instance restarts, which is another consideration that you have to make. Are we going to send all that history again? How are we going to manage that? And this is where a database comes in to make sure that you are not losing the context of the user in every message. Finally, you've got a rate limiter there as well. So as I mentioned, you should use something like APIM as a gateway to make sure that the users aren't abusing your system, and to also prevent DDoS attacks and other, in production, to limit those sorts of scenarios. And then, yeah, be very cautious about your input and output tokens, and make sure that that you're very mindful of those tokens. Let me now share. I've actually been going through the content filters, and let me share what that screen looks like. This is really exciting because it allows you to do every part of creating an AI in one system, in one studio. So this is the content filters tab at the bottom here. And all I've done is I've just created a content filter. So when you come to the tab, you'll click the create button and then type in some basic information, select the connection, which is your OpenAI model that the content filter will be based on. And then you can tweak things. So violence, hate, obviously sexual content, self-harm content, you can tweak the threshold. There's also built-in filtering for jailbreaks, and there's also prompt shields for indirect attacks. In conjunction with that, there is also a block list of words, and you can customize what this block list contains. So that gives you a lot of options to filter any hateful or mistrustful user inputs. Output filter. So that's the user input filters. This is the output filter. So with this, it will filter the outputs and make sure that the outputs don't have any protected material and anything of these categories. So anything that the model generates will not have it. And then this is just which deployment to apply the filter to. And that's it. You've created the filter. The filter will then automatically be applied to those deployments. And then when you use those deployments in your chat or in the prompt flow, that'll automatically be all applied. Cool. So there you go. There's your content filter right there. Yeah, so that's all been applied through here as well. Let me just go into deployments just to double check. Yeah, so the deployments are still here. The filter should have been applied. Oh, there you go, content filter. So all of these has this content filter being applied already. You can see how easy that is to set up. And now I can just continue building my prompt flow as if nothing happened. And I have my content filter. The other thing that I wanted to see was how do you create one of those custom lists? Currently, I've only got the profanity list. There's definitely documentation on this. I'm not 100% sure how to create one of those lists, but there's definitely documentation which can give you an idea. Awesome. Let's go back to the slides. Actually, I know that we've got 5 more minutes left. So maybe if there's any questions, I'll answer them. Otherwise, I'll cover the slides for 5 more minutes, and then we'll leave it there. This is, again, talking about input and output tokens. You should set your max tokens as well. Content filters, we just covered this and how to do that. You can also put it in as in the API request, but it's definitely easier to build that all into AI Studio. There you go. This is your content filter. Message analytics, we also covered how to get those analytics going for your endpoint. So important that you make sure that you do that. If you are storing all the prompts and all the outputs in something like Cosmos DB, you can run analytics through that as well. Session IDs are valuable, of course. You can use the user context as well. So there is a specific user context, and that gives you access to the unique identifier of your user. However, I would recommend using your own authentication toolkit and using that to identify the user instead. So whenever someone goes onto your application, they should have to log in. And then once they log in, they'll be able to use your application, and you'll know who they are and any context that they've had in the past. I'm just going to stop there and answer any questions that you have. But if there's nothing else, I just wanted to cover the first 10 or so of these. I'm happy to, there are other links as well. So I'm happy to post those if you want to learn more about going production scale or learn more about AI Studio. But with that, I think thanks everyone for joining in this session. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks so much for that, Deep. And thank you everyone for joining. We'll make sure that we post the links for you in the meetup as well. And I'll also just pop the Azure pricing page down for everyone that was asking, as well as the second and the first session of the series too. So thank you all. And a big thank you to Deep for doing monthly series with us, hey? And saying awesome. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, if you have any questions that come through later, I will forward them on to Deep. But if not, I hope you all have a great night or afternoon from wherever you're tuning in, and we will see you all next time. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.